Well, Elon Musk got a lot of people fired up on his most recent appearance of Joe Rogan when he made some interesting comments about Social Security. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I mean, the government's one big pyramid scheme, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, you can tell me better than anybody.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Right, explain that.
Oh, so, well, people pay into Social Security, and the money goes out of Social Security immediately, but the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. Like if you look at the future obligations of Social Security, it far exceeds the tax revenue. Basically, people are living way longer than expected, and there are fewer babies being born. So you have more people who are retired and that live for a long time and get retirement payments. So the future obligations. So however bad the financial situation is right now for the federal government, it will be much worse in the future.
All right, this obviously caused a big uproar and some pretty heated debate online. As somebody with several clients collecting Social Security and even more clients hoping to one day collect it, I do have some thoughts on this. Fortunately, the SEC gives us a nice framework for identifying Ponzi schemes that we can sort of just run Social Security through. A Ponzi scheme, not to be confused with the pyramid scheme, is an investment fraud that pays existing investors with funds collected from new investors. So it requires this continuous stream of new participants to sustain payouts, and then when new contributions slow down, the whole thing collapses, which is what happened with the OG of Ponzi schemes, Charles Ponzi back in the 1920s, and then more recently, Bernie Madoff in 2008, who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Or did he? Or does that title belong to the US government? Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, meaning that current workers' payroll taxes fund benefits for current retirees, rather than individuals saving for their own future benefit. So when you pay into Social Security, that money is not set aside in a personal account just for you, like with a 401k. Instead, it's immediately used to pay existing beneficiaries. So the system relies on a steady flow of new workers contributing to sustain those Social Security payments. But this was not actually the original intent. Originally, Social Security was designed to collect payroll taxes and build a reserve before paying benefits. But then in 1939, Congress changed the way the system worked to pay retirees sooner during the Great Depression, which then shifted Social Security toward the pay-as-you-go model that we have today. So it was around 1940 when current retirees started to depend on new contributions to fund benefits. So it didn't last very long before we shifted to that model. But at the time, it was not a concern because you had so many people paying into it and so little people collecting. It really didn't become an issue until 2010 when there just wasn't enough workers contributing to cover current benefits, and that required money to be withdrawn from the Social Security Reserve Fund, which is set to run out by 2034, and at that point, benefits will be cut by 21% if no modifications are made before then. So logistically, it has operated very similar to a Ponzi scheme, regarding the funding mechanism at least. That's been sufficient, that's worked, as all Ponzi schemes are at the beginning, until you don't have enough contributors, and then it all unravels. Now, I think there are a few key differences that would not definitionally qualify Social Security as a Ponzi scheme, with the number one being the fraud element. With a Ponzi scheme, it's an intentional act of deception where the organizers promise to invest your money and generate these high returns with little or no risk. That's not how Social Security works. There was never a promise of high returns. It doesn't appear that Social Security is an intentional act of deception by the US government. The stated goal was, and still is, I believe, a social safety net. There's a benefits formula that you can use to determine your expected payout. You can actually log on to ssa.gov to see what your expected benefits are based on your work history. Now, the implied return of those benefits are not unrealistic or unreasonable. In fact, they're pretty underwhelming. It's hard to pinpoint a specific rate of return because some people's Social Security contributions are capped. Benefits vary with inflation. Not everybody gets a benefit directly proportional to what they put in. But for the middle income earners, Social Security provides an effective return of maybe 3 to 4% per year, similar to US Treasuries. Social Security contributions have never been invested in the stock or bond market. They're invested in US Treasuries backed by the US government. So there doesn't appear to be this intentional scheme to deceive investors or taxpayers into thinking that we're going to get this high return year after year. Then there's the transparency aspect. So unlike a Ponzi scheme where fraudsters mislead investors about how that money is being used, Social Security structure is openly documented. While it is true that contributions are immediately used to pay current beneficiaries, this process is public knowledge. unlike a Ponzi scheme. The Social Security Administration actually publishes an annual trustees report, and it goes through its financial status and clearly states the expected funding shortfall. So there is at least some level of transparency there. And technically, Social Security funds can't pay for anything else outside of Social Security obligations. Now, there's a lot of talk about people collecting Social Security fraudulently, and I'm sure there's some of that. I don't think fraud is 0%, but I don't have the data to determine the extent of that issue. Another difference between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme is the sustainability mechanism. So with Ponzi schemes, they inevitably collapse when new investments slow down. And that's the point we're getting to with Social Security, and I believe the point Elon was making. There are not enough new people contributing to fully cover the benefits of those collecting due to low birth rates, a high number of retirees with longer life expectancy, and then the low-ish wage cap on taxable Social Security income. The difference with Social Security compared to a Ponzi scheme, while it is facing a funding shortfall, is there are some options to avoid a total collapse. Congress can adjust payroll taxes, the wage cap can be raised, or the retirement age can be adjusted. So you do have some options here. It's also worth pointing out, because this has been mentioned a few times, that insurance operates in a similar manner, where payouts depend on continued premium contributions. The difference with insurance companies is that they actually invest the premiums in stocks, bonds, other assets, and they adjust premiums to ensure that future payouts can be met. But I think the biggest difference separating Social Security from a Ponzi scheme is that it was authorized by Congress. Now, just because Congress approved it doesn't mean it's the best or most effective approach, but it was signed into law in 1935. We all know how the system works. We can go read the bill. So is Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme in history? In terms of its funding mechanism, yes, very much so. And like with the Ponzi scheme, it will eventually be unable to meet its obligations if left unaddressed. But is it fraudulent like a Ponzi scheme is? No, I don't believe so. Social Security openly acknowledges its shortfall, which is the opposite of how a Ponzi scheme operates. It's certainly going to require some restructuring in some way to continue meeting its objective.